Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the February 19th meeting of the Larimer County Planning Commission. It's the tradition of the Planning Commission to start each meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'd ask everybody to stand and please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm Patrick Rowe. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission. Thank you for being with us tonight. Copies of the agenda can be found up against the wall there by the door. We'd ask everybody to please mute their cell phones. The members of this Planning Commission are volunteers, and I'm going to ask each member to introduce themselves, starting with Commissioner Duffy.
Good evening. My name is Connor Duffy. I've been on the Planning Commission for about 3.5 years now, and I live in the Timnath area.
I'm Adam Eggleston. I live in Southeast Fort Collins, and I've been on the Planning Commission since last July.
I'm John Weiss. I've been on the commission since July of last year, and I live in Timnath.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shelby King. I've been on the commission since July of 2023, and I live in LaPorte.
My name's Nick Cassidy. I've been on the commission since July of last year, and I live in Fort Collins.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Cholet. I've been on the Planning Commission since December of 2023, and I live in Wellington.
And again, I'm Patrick Rowe, and I live in Northwest Fort Collins, and I've been on the commission for coming up on 4 years now. Jenny Axmaker is the planning manager. Ms. Axmaker, would you mind introducing staff in attendance and providing meeting protocol for this evening, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joining me at the dais tonight are Christine Luckison from the County Attorney's Office. We have Danielle Reimanis, one of our county planners. We have Scott Benton, our county environmental planner. Joined from our planning administration team, we have Ryan Oswandel and Melissa Brusky. Across the way, joining us at the staff table, we have senior planner Samantha Mott. We have from our engineering division, Stephen Rothwell and Tracy Shambo. And joining us from the health department, we have Leah Snyder. So we respectfully request that all members of the public silence their electronic devices. And as the chair mentioned, you can help yourself to an agenda right next to the door, or if you're joining us via Zoom, you can find the agenda at larimer.org/BOCC/commissioners-meetings. For the hearing tonight, we are utilizing a sign-up sheet, so if you wish to provide public comment, we would request that you sign up outside the door, and we will be limiting public comment to 3 minutes per person unless the chair decides otherwise. The hearing procedures for tonight: for each discussion item, we will begin with a presentation from county staff, followed by a presentation from the applicant, with time for any clarifying questions from the commissioners. There will be an opportunity for any members of the public to address the commission and their comments on the matter. Please sign up if you wish to make public comment. Both the applicant and county staff will have an opportunity to respond with any questions or concerns raised during public testimony. The commission will then ask any remaining questions of the applicant or staff before entering into deliberation and working towards a decision on the matter. During public comment, please wait to speak until you're recognized by the chair. Please maintain civility, refraining from audience applause, comments, or disruptions, whether positive or negative. Anyone causing a disruption during the public hearing will be asked to leave. Please direct all comments to the commissioners from the podium. We do have a portable microphone available if needed. Please state your name at the beginning of your comments and provide the spelling of your name if it's uncommon. Please speak directly into the microphone so that any remote participants may hear. For our hybrid meetings, attendees will be muted until they are recognized by the chair. If an online attendee wishes to speak or request a consent item to be removed, please use the raise your hand function on the Zoom control bar or *9 on your phone. Upon request, we do have assisted listening devices available for the hearing impaired. There are 3 items on the consent agenda tonight and 1 item on the discussion agenda. And just as A note, if the Planning Commission has a legal question during the hearing, they may elect to go into an executive session with the county attorney. Executive sessions are private meetings where the board can get confidential legal advice. So rather than asking everyone in attendance to exit the hearing room, the board will relocate to a smaller private room. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Axmaker. I have some brief comments about the role of the Planning Commission for the audience. The Planning Commission acts as an advisory board to the Larimer County Commissioners. We review and make recommendations on land use issues outside of towns and city boundaries. Some land use decisions will also be heard by the Board of County Commissioners. We come to these meetings and hearings unbiased and listen to staff's reports, public testimony, and information provided by the applicant. Planning Commission is the final decision-making body for location and extent reviews, as well as for amendments to and approvals of the Larimer County Master Plan, sub-area plans, and amendments. The Planning Department staff provides us with a comprehensive package of information about land use applications and amendments. We gain insights from the information and viewpoints that you all provide as the public, so we greatly appreciate your attendance and participation. And with that, I'll ask, are there any amendments to the agenda as published, Ms. Axmaker?
No, but I would point out that before we get to the approval of the minutes, we do have an action item of the posting of the public meeting.
Okay, great. First, it looks like on our agenda is public comment on the county land use code or regarding relevant land use matters not on the agenda or future proposals. So this is the public's opportunity to provide comment or testimony on anything that's not on tonight's agenda or planned future agenda. Is there anyone who wishes to make a comment in the audience here today or online? And seeing none here, anyone online? None. Okay. So next we'll move to our first action item, so posting of a public meeting. I would entertain a motion.
I move the Larimer County Planning Commission designate www.larimer.org as the place for posting notice of public meetings, and if exigent or emergency circumstances prevent the online posting at such location, public notice shall be physically posted at the bulletin boards located at the north and south entrances of the Larimer County Courthouse Office Building at 200 West Oak, Fort Collins, Colorado, in accordance with the Colorado Open Meetings Law.
And Commissioner Duffy, before there's a second, I just have two quick corrections on that motion, which is our error. It should be larimer.gov. And then instead of the courthouse office buildings, it should be the administrative services building at 200 West Oak. And you can just say, I amend my motion in line with staff's comments.
I amend my motion in line with staff's comments.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion, and maybe just before we look for a second, is there some explanation? So this is something we do on a periodic basis to kind of set this as the location for postings, or
That's correct. We do this every year.
every year? Okay.
And with every different board and commission.
Okay. Okay. Well, with that explanation, we have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Roll call.
Cholet,
Yes.
Cassidy,
Yes.
Weiss,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Eggleston,
Yes.
Rowe,
Yes.
Duffy.
Yes.
Motion passes. And then second item on our action item is the annual board training. Is there any further information on that?
I would just like to put everyone on notice that we have annual compliance training coming up, likely at our next meeting. We'll send out the PowerPoint presentation for you to get a sneak preview in advance, but that is something that we do every year as well.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. Next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. We've got 2 meeting minutes to approve, November 20th and 2024, November 20th, 2024, and December 18th, 2024. Do we have any corrections, or otherwise I'll entertain a motion on approving those minutes?
I move to approve the meeting minutes of November 20th, 2024, and the meeting minutes for December 18th, 2024.
Motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Cassidy,
Yes.
Cholet,
Yes.
Weiss,
Yes.
Eggleston,
Yes.
Rowe,
Yes.
Duffy,
Yes.
and King.
Yes.
Okay. Motion passes. So next order of business is our consent agenda. And I have a conflict of interest related to one of the items on the consent agenda. Why don't is it all right if I just read out with the different items on the consent calendar?
So we'll have Commissioner Cholet take over that part. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll just point out it's the second item on there. It's the Olander Farms Root Shoot Malting item. And so I'm going to recuse myself from the slate of consent items and pass it to the vice chair for this portion, and I'll abstain.
Thank you, Chair. The items on the consent agenda are considered routine in nature, and as far as we know, there is no perceived or significant controversy. Items on the consent agenda will not have a staff presentation, the applicant will not get to speak, and there will not be an opportunity for public comment unless the item is pulled from the consent agenda. Planning commissioners are able to pull an item from the consent agenda as well as the public. If that occurs, then there would be a presentation, public comment, and all the rest of the procedure for that item. The items on the consent agenda are Dyer Subdivision Preliminary Plat, file number 24-Land 4442. Olander Farms Root Shoot Malting Amended Special Review, file number 21-Zone 3065. And Bacon Lake Sewer Interceptor and Water Transmission Line Project. Do any of my colleagues wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? I do not see any, nor do I wish to pull an item. Does anyone in the audience wish to pull an item from the consent agenda? Please raise your hand and then make your way to the podium to identify which item you would like to pull. I see none here in person. Do we have anyone joining us online who wishes to pull an item from the consent agenda? Please use the raise hand function on the Zoom toolbar or press *9 on your phone now. Do we have any hands raised online?
We do not have any hands raised online.
All right. Thank you. Okay, now may I have a motion on the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda items.
Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Weiss,
Yes.
Cassidy,
Yes.
Cholet,
Yes.
Duffy,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Eggleston.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. And now I will pass it back over to you, Chair.
Great, thank you. So now we'll move on to discussion items. We have a single discussion item this evening. It's the Halligan Water Supply Project 1041 permit. It's file number 24, zone 3697. Ms. Axmaker, is this your item? And do you have a presentation?
It is indeed, Chair. Thank you. And just as a reminder, if you're here for one of the consent items, you are more than welcome to leave. So the discussion item tonight is 24-Zone 3697, the Halligan Water Supply Project 1041 permit. Before we dive into the specifics on this project, I just wanted to give a brief overview, if my presentation will cooperate, with the 1041 permit process. So what are 1041 regulations? These give local governments the authority to regulate matters of statewide concern. This includes the development of regional transportation and utility infrastructure. It can also be used to protect specific geographical areas with historic, cultural, or natural resources of statewide importance. It includes a variety of different activities, and within Larimer County, we have designated new and converted power plants, reservoirs, pipelines, etc. The 1041 process timeline is dictated by state statute. Tonight, we are on what is referenced as step 6 within this slide. The Planning Commission is holding a hearing to provide a recommendation to the county commissioners on the 1041 application. I'll note that once the application was submitted, staff initially had 60 days to determine if the application was complete. And once the application was determined complete, a hearing had to be scheduled no more than 30 days after the receipt or the announcement of the completion, and that hearing has to occur within 60 days. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to have the first of 2 public hearings on the application. This is an opportunity for public input. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of County Commissioners in a separate hearing will make a final determination at an additional land use hearing. The 1041 permit cases on tonight's agenda will be heard on the March 24th Board of County Commissioners land use hearing. So let's dive into Halligan. This is a 1041 permit request for an area of state activity under Article 10 of the Land Use Code for the expansion of Halligan Reservoir. This involves constructing a new dam, partial demolition of the old dam, reconstruction of the North Poudre Canal diversion, construction of a fish passage at the Fort Collins intake diversion structure at Gateway Park, and additional supporting infrastructure improvements. Halligan Reservoir, let's see if I can, my cursor will show up, is located 25 miles northwest of Fort Collins. The proposed work includes activities around this existing dam. The dam is being relocated in order to allow for an expansion of the water capacity at the Halligan Reservoir. The activities also include the North Poudre Canal diversion, which is located 3.5 miles southeast of the dam. It's right here. Not that that map shows up very well on the screen, my apologies. And additional work at the Gateway Natural Area along the main stem of the Cache-la-Poudre River. Temporary construction access areas include roads to the dam, with the west side accessed off Highway 287 and the east side accessed from Cherokee Park Road, County Road 80C. I think that's actually, the east side is accessed off Highway 287 and the west side is off Cherokee Park. Here's another map. Sorry, this isn't larger, but just to show you the Gateway area that I couldn't point out on the past map is further south, located in this general vicinity. The owner and applicant is the city of Fort Collins. They're looking to expand the total reservoir surface area from 253 acres to 391 acres. The surrounding land uses are primary agricultural and rural residential. It's zoned O open. And as we talked about, the west side is accessed from 287 and the east from Cherokee Park. The Gateway Natural Area access is off Highway 14, Poudre Canyon Road, and the North Poudre Canal diversion is accessed off County Road 80C. The City of Fort Collins, acting through the Fort Collins Utilities, is pursuing this project as a municipal water supply project. It involves enlarging the existing reservoir on the North Fork of the Cache-la-Poudre River, and the existing Halligan Reservoir currently supplies water to stakeholders of the Northern Poudre Irrigation Company, or NPIC, which would continue to use this and operate the historical reservoir pool of 6,400 acre-feet. Fort Collins would then store its water in the enlarged portion of the reservoir. This water primarily comes from water rights historically used to irrigate now developed lands in the Fort Collins area that have been transferred to municipal use. This is just a map showing the existing footprint of the reservoir as well as the enlarged expanded reservoir with some areas of permanent impacts. This is a site looking from the west, looking northeast towards the reservoir. And here is a model of the rendering of the replacement dam, including the spillway and nearby site access roads. This is looking north towards the reservoir. The proposed construction timeline, I included this merely to point out that should the 1041 permit be approved and they get through the technical review portion, which would be a separate step within the Larimer County development review process, the next items would be working on the west access road as well as a construction of a test quarry. And concurrently with this, there's additional permitting through the state and federal government, as well as final design. It looks like, according to this timeline, that construction of the replacement dam and expanded reservoir would be completed around 2030. So the infrastructure proposed as part of this project is the replacement of the dam, which includes outlet works, stilling basin, and other appurtenant structures. And this will occur approximately 200 feet downstream of the existing dam. They're going to remove the overhead power lines and replace that with solar, micro hydropower, and diesel generators. There'll be a partial demolition of the existing dam, and then the construction of operational support buildings and oxygenation system to provide dissolved oxygen to the reservoir, improving water quality. There's construction of a river crossing below the existing dam. They're also going to reconstruct the Northern Poudre Canal diversion with the potential for a fish passage. And temporary construction features include widening of roadways to allow for construction vehicles, construction staging areas, a concrete batching plant, and a quarry for concrete aggregates. There will be permanent remnants of construction, including disposal stockpiles and new access roads in the area of the dam. And then construction of a fish passage around the Fort Collins intake diversion structure at Gateway Park. So a few noteworthy impacts and mitigation I wanted to point out as part of this project. And just to note, this project has been ongoing for many years. I'm sure the applicant can tell you more of those exact details, but they've already been through the NEPA process to get their EIS completed, as well as prior public outreach involved in that. So the impacts I wanted to point out, they do have impacts to roadways, which include additional traffic and wear and tear. These are proposed to be mitigated through roadway improvements, traffic controls, maintenance, and those are also reinforced through the proposed conditions of approval that staff has included in the staff report. There's a proposed test quarry, which could have noise and dust impacts similar to a permanent quarry, should the aggregate on-site be found to be usable for construction. And with those construction impacts include noise and dust. Those will be mitigated through best practices, restrictions, and proposed conditions. There will be a reduction in on-site wetlands and wildlife habitat. The applicant is proposing off-site mitigation through the purchase of wetland mitigation credits and habitat preservation. And this is in excess of the requirement that they would be required to just to come to a one-to-one balance. They're also proposing collaring and monitoring of bighorn sheep and an improved rangeland habitat. For streams and water quality, they're proposing an enhancement of intermittent flows in the main channel of the North Fork. They're proposing the creation of up to 2 fish passages and additional oxygenation and temperature buffer pool for dam releases. So as usual, this project was provided public notice. We notified all the property owners within a 500-foot area, and that map shows those property owners that were notified. Fort Collins, as I mentioned, has previously done extensive outreach for the project, including with the EIS process they went through, and we did provide our standard notice. As of noon on February 19th, we've received a total of 1 comment from members of the public. It was included in the packet, and it was in support of the project. As far as referral agencies go, we sent this to 33 different referral agencies and received responses from 17 of those. Those are listed below. What we heard from the referral agencies is that there were the project appears feasible, there are no major objections raised, but there were requirements for additional documentation, mitigation, and permitting before final approval, and this includes compliance with federal and state regulations before construction can proceed. The Larimer County Land Use Code identifies approval criteria for all 1041 permits. There are 22 of them. I am not going to go into detail on these approval criteria. I do have them all. I am perfectly willing to go into detailed approval or a detailed discussion on any of them should the commission wish, but they kind of fall into 10 different themes. Resources of state and national significance, neighbors and property, environmental resources, public safety, IGAs, our standard development standards, adequate public facilities, environmental health and hazards, response to referral agencies, as well as technical and financial feasibility of project and mitigation. Staff reviewed the submitted documentation, we reviewed the land use code criteria, and found that the proposed Halligan Water Supply Project 1041 permit application satisfies all the applicable criteria as discussed in detail in the staff report, subject to the implementation of the conditions as approved and recommended by staff. Why do we include conditions of approval? As I mentioned earlier, there is a state-dictated timeframe that staff has to review these projects, so we are not able to have much of a back and forth with the applicant in order to satisfy any outstanding concerns regarding the application, and so conditions of approval are a way that staff can get the project to meet all of our standards. So we have them to guide the technical review process, which would be the next step should this 1041 permit be approved. They're also to bridge the gap between the project and the criteria, as I initially mentioned, due to the limited time frame for review, and to clarify how the project is implemented and operated. We are recommending 53 conditions of approval for the Halligan Water Supply Project, and I just summarized these with the categories of recommended conditions. So we have some general conditions that include things like compliance with state and federal permits. Then the health department has a number of conditions relating to the future technical review, construction and operations compliance, air emissions, demolition, noise, adequate facilities, and should there be any future recreation on this property, what would be required. Our engineering department also has conditions related to final design and permitting. They also have schedule and inspections conditions related to construction on county roadways, and then post-construction requirements. We have a number of wildlife and vegetation conditions, as well as a couple cultural and historic resource conditions proposed. With that, we do have a suggested motion. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Ms. Axmaker. Before I ask my colleagues if they have any questions of staff, I should have done this at the onset, but I did want to disclose that my spouse works for the city of Fort Collins, and I don't believe that that'll impair my ability to be objective on this matter, so I'm planning to still participate. So yeah, with that, I'll ask my colleagues if they have any questions of staff at this time, just clarifications on the presentation or additional information that you'd like shared now before we give the applicant their opportunity to present. Commissioner Weiss?
Thank you. We received a letter from the city of Fort Collins dated February 17th, in which the city appears to maybe take exception to some of the conditions, and it may be part of the technical review, I don't know, but if staff could maybe just highlight whether or not you're in agreement with these proposed changes or what?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. One of the conditions that the applicant requested some tweaks to is condition number 4, and that states that the application is valid for 3 years, and if action isn't taken within that 3-year time period, that the application would be void. The intention behind that condition was to align with our land use code that talks in more detail about that 3-year approval period, and it also goes into further detail, I think, based on state statute. Please correct me, council, if I am wrong, but we didn't include the details that actually are outlined in the code that allow for exceptions should litigation be pursued or there be other things that prevent the project from moving forward. And so staff is more than happy to align that condition with what is written in the land use code based on Fort Collins's request. One of the other items in the letter from earlier this week is referencing just an engineering comment, and so I don't believe that's a condition of approval that needs to be addressed in this. The other condition of approval that they requested modification to was related to a comment from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. They stated that they were working on an IGA with the applicant and that they would be comfortable that certain criteria were met should that IGA be completed. So we had the completion of that IGA recommended as a condition of approval. That was on Colorado Parks and Wildlife's behalf. Staff is open to further discussion on that and would be curious if the commissioners have any suggestions on whether they feel that's an important condition to maintain or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Commissioner Weiss. Any other commissioners? Yes.
So, can you just clarify for me? There was something at the beginning of your presentation today that I guess I don't recall reading, but it was a lot to read. What is the nexus between what the city of Fort Collins is trying to do and North Pooter irrigation? Can you explain that to me a little bit more?
So I believe the applicant could provide additional detail, but the reservoir is currently being used by North Pooter Irrigation Company, and they have the current capacity within the reservoir. The reason that we're doing the Halligan expansion is for the city, or they're doing the Halligan expansion is for the city of Fort Collins to be able to store additional water supply within that same reservoir.
So, in essence, the city of Fort Collins and North Pooter Irrigation Company would be utilizing the same reservoir
That's my understanding.
and just have a certain amount of acre feet per. Okay, thank you. That was all I needed.
Thanks, Commissioner Chalet. Any others? And otherwise, yeah, we'd invite the staff to give us their presentation if you guys want to come forward with that.
The applicant.
I'm sorry? Did I say
You said staff, but I assume you meant the
I'm sorry,
applicant.
I meant applicant. Yeah, if the applicant wants to come forward with their presentation. And do you guys have a time for your application? Typically, we're allowing around 10 or 15 minutes. Is 15 minutes sufficient?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to come to the podium, or can we do
That-
it from here?
That's more typical, but I think if you guys are more comfortable back there, that's fine with me. So.
All right. Good evening, commissioners and county staff. Thank you for considering the Halligan Water Supply Project 1041 application. My name is Nicole Poncelet Johnson, and I'm the One Water Executive Director for the City of Fort Collins. And I have with me Darren Parkin. If you guys would raise your hand as I call your name. Darren Parkin, the Halligan Project Manager at the City of Fort Collins. Eric Potiondi, the Legal Counsel for City of Fort Collins. Tyler Marr, Deputy City Manager, City of Fort Collins. Honora Thomas, Senior Communications Specialist. Stephanie Kreka, Senior Communications Specialist. And Keith Meyer, President of Ditesco and Project Advisor. Out of transparency, I serve on the Larimer County Environmental Science Advisory Board, but I am here today in my role as Executive Director for the City of Fort Collins. As an ESAB member, I have not discussed the Halligan project with county staff or commissioners. Next slide, please. Just to give you a brief overview of the City of Fort Collins water system, we have trans-basin water that is stored from Colorado Big Thompson that's stored in Horsetooth Reservoir, and also North Platte water that is stored in Joe Wright Reservoir. We also have native water rights that are stored in Halligan Reservoir along the North Pooter, which is the subject of today's presentation. This water supply portfolio supplies a vibrant community of the city of Fort Collins, approximately 140,000 residents, and somewhere in the future 175,000 residents. And it also helps support, as you noted earlier, the North Pooter Irrigation Company, which helps with our regional water suppliers like Elko and our agricultural partners in the area. So Halligan Reservoir serves as a key tool in the tool bucket of water supply in this region, not just for the city of Fort Collins. Next slide, please. The city of Fort Collins is uniquely positioned to replace the aging dam at Halligan Reservoir, which is over 100 years old, and add 8,200 acre feet of storage for reliability that supports the utility's customers now and in the future, and mitigate impacts from drought and climate change. Next slide, please. In addition to it being a cost-effective approach for improving storage, it also provides a number of environmental benefits for the region, which Darren Parkin will speak to here in just a moment. So with that, I will introduce Darren Parkin, if you would come up. Thank you.
Good evening, Commission. We'll take you through the next few slides here. Next slide, please. So background and project description. We'll give a brief overview. This project has been in the works for a while. It was conceived clear back in the 1980s by the utility. This isn't something that just came about, recently. It's been in the works for quite a while. We entered into purchase agreements with North Poudre Irrigation Company to acquire the reservoir and some surrounding lands around the reservoir in the late 80s, early 90s. Next slide, please, Jenny. And we began our federal permitting process way back in 2006. So this has been worked on for an awful long time. We did have a milestone, a significant milestone in 2023 when we were issued our final EIS as part of our NEPA permitting process. Next slide, please. So this has been mentioned before in the staff report, but we are enlarging. There's 6,400 acre feet of water existing in the reservoir that is owned and controlled by North Poudre Irrigation Company. We're essentially going to put 8,200 acre feet on top of that existing 6,400. In doing that, though, it's a very minimal additional surface inundation. The reservoir sits in a pretty steep walled canyon. As you see, it's currently at the normal pool, 253 surface acres, and it will only go to 391. The vertical rise on the reservoir after we do our project will only be 26 vertical feet. You see the existing dam there, that has been in place since 1909. It was always envisioned that there would be a larger reservoir in this location. However, it was funding. There's a whole series of things that happened back in the early 1900s, and essentially they could only build it to that size, and it's been operating, there ever since. The current dam's about 77 feet tall. Our new dam's going to be twice that big, 144 and a half feet. It'll be roller compacted concrete. The size of the dam is really dictated by current flood requirements. We have to build it big and tall and wide, and we're actually limited by the width of that canyon. It's at the head of the Phantom Canyon to try to get the maximum flood that's modeled through our spillway, which is significantly larger. Our new current spillway on the old dam can handle a few thousand. I think it's 12,000 CFS, and we'll be able to handle 120,000 CFS through our primary spillway with this new structure. As you can see, there will be a road from either side, from each abutment, and there's a crossing that will be constructed over the North Fork. The new dam will be 200 feet directly downstream from the old dam. Next slide, please. So our 1041 permit is all-encompassing. There's a lot of components to this project that are beyond the actual dam site itself. And this is just an overview of all of those, or some of those. We talked about the single-phase overhead power line that feeds the site now. That will be removed post-construction. It would be inundated by the new expanded storage pool, and so it would need to be moved anyway. But we would really like to be more environmentally conscious and make this an off-grid facility, so that is our plan. Combination of micro hydro, some generator backup, small-scale solar, batteries, heat pumps. So we'll be a completely off-grid, very low emissions facility. We talked about the North Poudre Canal, the MPIC diversion that's downstream in Phantom Canyon. That will be replaced, this old structure. It goes into a tunnel that's not shown in this picture that doglegs into the North Poudre Canal for the North Poudre Irrigation Company. Currently, if you look close below, you see all those willows and trees and all the growth in the stream channel of the North Fork. That's because historically the irrigation company has dried up the river essentially there. They sweep the river in a lot of cases, put their water through the tunnel. It goes through a partial flume. They measure what they're legally able to take or what they physically can take in their conveyance canal, and then they divert the rest back into the river system. Leaves a stretch that's dry, and the environmental conditions there over the last 100 plus years are very poor. That is one of our key pieces of mitigation of this project, is we'll talk about that in a few minutes, is to re-wet these historical river stretches of the North Fork that have been going dry annually for over 100 years. Bottom left, that's an aerial view. If you look at kind of the zigzags down the hillside there, those were constructed for drill pads for our geotechnical review. That's essentially the center line of the new dam. We'll be right there. The quarry, the test quarry that's been talked about, really isn't totally in this picture, but on the left, on site, that's where the aggregate quarry is proposed to be for this project. Bottom center, those are access roads. Those were mentioned in the comments. This is an example of, this is from the west access through the Phantom Canyon LAPCR Land Association of Phantom Canyon Ranches property. And it's our goal to maintain per the landowners, the native condition of these roads as much as possible. We have to have constructability to be able to get our equipment in and out, but at the same time, we're hearing from the landowners they don't want haul roads, they don't want huge improvements to these roads. We've done assessments already. We've documented their current conditions. We've agreed with part of our easements to return those back to this state post-construction if at their discretion. And we're going to propose fairly minor improvements to these access roads, which may necessitate a variance process with staff. We have support of the landowners to do that. That will be coming ahead of, I would imagine, the hearing before the commissioners. And in the bottom right is the gateway diversion. That is the intake of the Fort Collins Municipal Pipeline. On the other side of the river, where you see the rocks there, that's where the fish passage would go. So we will remove this 100% block of trout from being able to move past this structure on the main stem of the Poudre River. That is a mitigation that will take place concurrently with the construction of the new dam. Next slide, please. So this is our timeline, and we already mentioned the federal process began way back in 2006, and then there's a very long gap from 2006 to 2019. There wasn't that nothing happened there, it's just things move pretty slow in a large project like this. However, we got to where we got our draft environmental impact statement in 2019, and since then we've been able to hit benchmarks, and we're making real progress through our permitting with this project. 2023 was a great year for Halligan. We got the approval of the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Enhancement Plan, which is approved by the governor's office, and it is the official position of the state of Colorado in support of our project, and it contains the bulk of our mitigations for this project. There are other mitigations from other sources, such as the 401 water quality cert. We'll talk about that in a second. We also, in late 2023, got our final environmental impact statement released. So that was a huge success for us. It's incomplete in two things. It's incomplete. It does not contain the 401 water quality certification. That modeling is done. That application is being put together. It is going to go in for review in the next couple months. And it did not include the wetlands plan, mitigation plan. That is done and actually went into the Army Corps today. So those will be put together. Obviously, keeping on the timeline here, the 1041 is happening right now. And then 60% draft design came in 2 weeks ago. We are going to go into final design early next year or mid next year. And we'll get our record of decision on the NEPA process second quarter-ish next year. And we hope to construct fairly shortly after that. So it's going to be late 2026, early 2027. We'll be in the start of construction, completion 29, 2030. 18 to 24 months is going to be the bulk of the actual dam construction, but the whole package with all these other projects is going to be about a 3-year construction window. Next slide. All right, so impacts, mitigation, and benefits. We'll go over those briefly. A lot of words on this slide. We'll talk about it shortly, and we can go in more in depth in the Q&A if needed. We do have critical habitat for the Preble's jumping mouse. That has been mitigated off-site through the Roberts Ranch conservation area. That was anticipated way back 2003, 2004, that there would need to be mitigation for that for this project. So the city bought in 60% of, I believe, what's called the Phase 1 conservation easement for Roberts Ranch, and has done extensive Preble's mitigation in that area, and that monitoring will continue. The other wildlife portion of this, before we construct, and some of these have already taken place. Of course, there'll be avian impacts that we'll look at, migratory bird surveys, the Townsend big-eared bat, bighorn sheep collaring. There is a small bighorn sheep herd that frequents this area somewhat, and there is a concern of this herd interacting with a herd down in the Poudre Canyon. So we have partnered with CPW, Parks and Wildlife, to collar that herd. We've made that payment this year, and so we can track the movements and make sure that our construction activities are not causing any undue stress to that bighorn sheep herd that exists in the area. And of course, other species through adaptive management. We identify any impacts, we will take care of those. Wetlands is all off-site mitigation. We have bought a brand new wetlands mitigation bank that is being built out. It's been permitted and being built out on the North Fork of the Poudre River, a few miles below the mouth of Phantom Canyon. That will supply all of our stream and wetlands mitigation credits at the direction of the Army Corps. We talked about potentially doing some on-site mitigation. They did not like that. They would prefer that we went through a bank that they permit, that they monitor, and so that's a fairly significant $7.4 $4 million purchase that we made for those credits to be acquired. The first credits from that bank should be released at the end of this year. And then the big one, the flow regime altering on North Fork that I've talked about a little bit. And we can talk about that. Well, before I go into that a little bit, we also have ramping rate limitations. So our operational plan on this reservoir is not just going to be shutting the water on and shutting the water off. We will slowly ramp the water up. We will slowly shut it off. That's to avoid things like thermal shock for fish, which our water quality and temperature modeling shows is probably not an issue, but we're going to do those ramping rate limitations anyway. We are going to bypass the 3 days of the peak flow every runoff to have more of a natural flow regime in the river down below. Sediment management, we will be releasing the first 800 CFS of flows through our low-level outlets to try to get sediment's not necessarily a bad thing. There is a sediment TMDL on the North Fork below the dam, but a lot of that stretch due to the dry ups is sediment starved. So we're going to try to get good sediment going through there, along with macroinvertebrate monitoring and brown trout spawning beds, and make sure we establish a healthier riparian habitat. Next slide, please. Try to finish this up real quick. So I think there's another piece to this one. There it is. So this denotes the dry up sections along the North Fork, and these pretty much happen on an annual basis. And so we will re-wet this entire stretch and avoid these dry ups. The goal is no more dry ups. It have to be a severe drought or really abnormal conditions. Our modeling shows that that's extremely rare, but our goal is to keep a base flow into the North Fork of the Poudre River that does not exist now. Next slide, please. Oh, there was another piece to it. It was a tricky one. So here we'll talk about our releases. These are our protectable releases or our mitigation releases. We will be protecting these in water court, and that process has started now, so nobody else can divert these. So in the wintertime, we will release 3 cubic feet per second from the reservoir for a 7-month period over the winter. That will also have the side benefit to spin our micro hydro unit, which will provide non-occupational heat for our valve house. Again, we're trying to do as much on-site generation, zero emissions as we can. In the summertime, we have a 5 cubic feet per second obligation from Halligan to Seaman Reservoir. We are also working with the city of Greeley to do a pass-through at Seaman and keep those flow obligations all the way down into the main stem. We have a net benefit because of this. It's a temperature net benefit for the entire stretch all the way into the main stem from Halligan from what exists currently. So that is really the crux of our mitigation. And I think that would be all.
All right.
For a quick overview.
Well timed. Yeah. Thanks. If you don't mind just hanging up front here for some questions from us.
Sure.
With that, I'd invite my colleagues to, if they have any questions for the applicant this time. Yeah. Commissioner Weiss.
I waited to give you other folks a chance, so I have a couple of questions. You answered a couple of that I already had. So one of the, I guess, amended conditions would be, in theory, once you have a 3-year window to get this thing going after litigation is complete. Assuming, for instance, litigation starts, do you just stop all work, or would you be doing some paperwork, so to speak, so that assuming litigation went your way, you would be at least further along in the process?
Well, being in the federal permitting process since 2006, I think we've become eternal optimists. We're hoping we don't have a litigation delay. But assuming that we do, that would be a hard decision that we would have to make, right? Do you move forward with, if our 404 permit is litigated, then it's a hard decision for us to make. Do we stop and wait for that litigation to move through, which can take several years, or do we move forward? And we've seen different projects regionally to take different approaches to that. And so that's a decision that we're trying to strategize, building that into the budget, building that into the timeline. We do realize that there is a real possibility that we would have a delay, and so we do want to have that carve out, and we'll be upfront that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't. Obviously, 2029, 2030 operational. We have our acceptance, our permit, we're ready to go. That does not include any kind of litigation delay.
Okay. So I read all the background stuff that I got. It was great nighttime reading. But maybe you can help me. I'm a little bit confused. We're going to have theoretically two sources of water. So, one, how are you going to separate so that you know that, or each party knows who's how much water each one is getting, and then when you release water downstream, whether it's to keep things going or whatever, whose water is that going to be? Who is that? The city's part of the water combined?
So the city's going to take over, assume all operations of the reservoir when we build this. And so we're working with MPIC to develop that operational plan of how we're going to split that out. So the split will take place at the MPC diversion, where they will be metered out their amount, and then the rest that's ours will go on past, plus the mitigation releases will go past. The irrigation company will not be contributing to the mitigation releases. That would be all Fort Collins water that would be doing that for those flows. But so the diversion structure that we have now, that's been out there for ever 100 years, is very simple. So we're going to build a more complex structure that is going to have measuring on it. It's going to have a gate at the head of that tunnel that's going to be able to put a metered amount. Our goal is to not just sweep the river and then figure it out on the back end and kick it back. We're going to put, if they need 150 CFS, we're going to try to get them 150 CFS. We don't want to short the irrigation company. That is important. It's adamant that they get their historical water that they've always got, that the water that they've stored legally that belongs to them, and they get it when they need it, and it gets shut off when they need it shut off. So all of that coordination is being put in place now. We're close enough, we're far enough along that those conversations are starting and happening. We've got some, conceptual ideas. We do have an agreement with MPIC on the reconstruction of the diversion itself, but that's where that split happens. We will have much better control over the water with the new dam. We're going to have jet valves that are very, very highly controllable to do those ramping rates. So it's not controlled like an old reservoir where you just have slide gates that go up and down. We'll have those big guard gates on the front, but they're mostly going to stay open all the time. All the control is back in the valve house by valves, and those valves can do very fine adjustments. It's a 72-inch main conduit through the dam that's going to split into a 48 and a 24, and then it might have a third split, which is where the micro hydro unit sits. The micro hydro unit has not been sized yet, but that the 3 to 5 CFS and some additional would go through the hydro unit all the time, and then we would go up to the 24-inch, which could handle, let's say, up to 200 CFS, and then to get the rest, all three would be open to get to our 800 target. But all that's monitored. We will have there's a USGS gauge in existence below the dam now. That is either going to be moved and reestablished, or we were going to have a rated stilling basin outfall. It's all going to be on instruments. It'll all be on the internet. It can all be monitored. And then we'll have a very precise splitting of water down at the MPC diversion. So it is a complicated thing. This isn't kind of a set it and forget it system. We have very complex operational management when we come online.
Okay, great. Thank you for that part. And then finally, again, I read stuff and there seems to be, or at least I was, some confusion for me as to what, if anything, in this are you proposing from a recreational standpoint?
So recreation was not included as purpose and need for this project. Purpose and need is for a water supply project.
Okay.
So, there's been some shoreline recreational access on the west end through the middle unit that's managed by CPW. We have had recreation conversations with CPW, but we've never been able to come to a consensus. We are building this as a municipal water supply project, not for recreation. So that's where we're at today. Maybe at some point in the future, we've agreed to talk to CPW about recreation then, but that's not our focus now. That's not in our permitting, and that's not what we're building. So there is no surface water recreation component to this project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner King.
Thank you. It's really thorough and well done. I'm curious about the two places that you talk about potential for fish passages. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about the plans at Gateway Park and the improvements, and then I believe there's a talk of potential fish passage mate. That's really hard to say.
It is.
Jenny, well done. Uh, in the dry area, if that's what I'm understanding correctly. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit more about the improvements to the habitat?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Gateway, it's on the main stem, so it's primarily going to be for fish, or excuse me, for trout. Of course, it's for fish. So it's for larger body trout, right? And they're athletic fish, and so that's going to be a more robust structure in the fact how much water it carries, the velocity of that water can be higher, and the range of flows that it can function can be a lot higher. We're hoping to have that passage be operational in a range between 10 CFS to 1300 CFS, wide range of flows to allow those trout to move. Brown trout, rainbow trout, they move different times of the year. One spring, one fall, I don't remember which is which, but we will have the ability for those trout to move both of those times through that fish passage. But it's going to be a larger structure in that sense because that's what it's designed for. Every fish passage you target towards obviously what your site conditions are, but then also what type of fish you're trying to move through it. If we move up to the one at the MPC diversion at the traditional dry up location, that's going to be more for small-bodied native fish, not the large trout. So that one is going to need to be more gentle. It's going to have lower velocities. They're going to be allowed to go through it, and that is also going to basically pass our 3 and 5 CFS. These flows that always need to be maintained. We will also provide that fish passage year-round for these small native fish. So they're very different conceptual designs for both. They kind of do the same thing, but they kind of do different. But that's really what it's for. I mean, the small-bodied natives, the block at the current MPC diversion doesn't matter because the rivers oftentimes dry below that anyway. So now you're going to open up many miles of that river channel to reestablish that habitat for a fish. And it's habitat for everything, right? You're starting with the insects and you're moving all the way up to the ungulates and avian, everything else start at the base and move up. It's not going to be a massive flow for like a blue ribbon trout fishing stream, but it's going to be that base flow that's going to be critical for the prebbles and every other animal out there. So that's what will be reestablished. So hopefully I answered the question.
Is it actually reintroducing fish to a place that currently
it's reintroducing water, not necessarily reintroducing fish. So if you build it, they will come kind of mentality.
Thanks.
Yeah, Commissioner Chalet.
Well, thank you for talking fast through your presentation and being right on time. I have a few questions for you. So, real quick on the North Poudre Irrigation Company, is there a potential for any negative impact to the customers of North Poudre Irrigation Company, whether that be agricultural uses or the municipalities, or maybe it's only one municipality that gets all of their water from there?
Yes, being a Wellington representative, I'm sure that is a question you want. No, we are absolutely committed to it'll be seamless for them. We cannot impact their deliveries at all. And certainly when we're built out and operational, that's one thing. Where the hardest coordination is going to be is during construction. Obviously, for risk management on the construction side, it would be really nice to lower Halligan Reservoir really low so that you don't have any, your construction site stays dry. We're not going to be able to do that. We're going to have to maintain a certain pool so that we don't short MPIC. We're, like I say, we're in constant communication with their board and their president. Those operational plans are in place. There will be extensive monetary damages that will need to be paid out should we short them, and I would imagine that would be another way we would get ourselves in litigation. So we are very aware that MPIC's deliveries are absolutely sacred, cannot be impacted. We're not going to dry up farmers. We're not going to dry up the town of Wellington with our project. Absolutely not.
Okay. Next question. Let's talk about jumping mouse. So what are the possible negative impacts of trying to relocate this endangered species?
We're not relocating any endangered species. We improved habitat offsite. So we did do ground studies to try to find them. This area of permanent impact has been identified. It's right on the edge of their critical habitat. I believe none were found. There were some found in the Meadow Creek drainage. If I'm in error, I will follow up with staff with that statement I just made. But we're not capturing or relocating any Preble's mice. We are improving habitat elsewhere to improve their populations and their numbers and monitoring that so that, to offset that loss of critical habitat in our permanent impact area and in our inundation pool.
Okay. And then I'm like all over the place, so hold on to yourself. Let's talk about air quality. So, two things popped out to me. Well, one, on site quarry and, concrete and all of that, which will have an impact on air quality. What is the expectation, or I guess I should say, has there been an expectation set for you in terms of what your cumulative impact will be? Because this will be the third project that I can think of that will be running at the same time in northern Larimer County, right? And we already have a real air quality problem here. So,
Yeah, so we have not started down the path for our air quality permitting quite yet. We've certainly had those conversations. Oftentimes that's something that you would maybe have the contractor do, but due to the sensitivities that you're talking about, we might try to get ahead of that and just working on that sooner rather than later. Obviously, we will meet the APIN standards, that permitting and monitoring and reporting standards, all Tier 4 equipment for emissions, Tier 4 standards, and we believe we're in a non-attainment area for ozone. Those maps are a little bit confusing. We're pretty far out there, but we certainly are aware of the sensitivity towards emissions on projects like this. When we do construction, we have that single power line that comes in single phase power. We're going to be heavily relying on gensets to run that batch plant and provide power. That's a temporary impact, but we will absolutely have a comprehensive air mitigation plan, and we're going to start on that sooner rather than later.
okay. Respectfully, I know it is probably in the non-attainment zone, but I don't want to see it grow.
Yes.
Right? So,
We agree.
and we're in a really bad spot, right? So, prevailing winds are out of the northwest. Like, this is like my mantra every time there's something with air quality, but I just happen to be lucky enough to have been taught by our health department over here where the winds come from. Okay, so let's talk about the generator after this is constructed, the diesel generator. Is that emergency only? How often do you expect that to run? Because that's certainly not necessarily environmentally friendly.
Yeah, I mean, the diesel component, that's what is proposed now. I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be powered by diesel. It could be a natural gas or another alternative. But we'll have a three-phase generator to move those big gates. And those big gates are for safety of dams with the state will need to be operated once a year. And so typically that big three-phase generator will fire up very rarely. We're doing our power demand loads right now for our instrumentation, our automation, our SCADA system and everything that we're building in now. And we're really hoping, if we're somewhere in that 60, 70 kilowatt hour range or a little higher, that between the combination of that micro hydro unit and smaller solar installations and heat pumps and batteries. And I say batteries, we talked about a very large, like lithium battery type installation. Now we're coming back to just smaller batteries. We feel like we can meet our electric demands outside of where we need three-phase power to run those large gates, which would be very rare. So the generators, the smaller generators would really be just in an emergency backup capacity. And it really is our goal to run those as little as possible because we don't want to run those either. We want to generate on-site power as much as we possibly can.
So when you say as little as possible, can you give me an idea of what that actually means?
Ideally, they would not run at all, other than to just cycle them to make sure they still run, on an annual basis. That's what we're trying to build. We don't have the final power demand numbers yet. That's the target. That's the goal. If we don't hit that, there would have to be a little more frequent operation. I can't give you a number, a little more frequent, but we're committed to fire generators as little as we possibly can.
Okay, and here's my last one, and it's probably a little bit of a tough one. But throughout this project, it's really emphasized that this is about drought protection and resiliency, not about growth. And so in the 1041 process, along with the 22 criteria that you have to meet, including air quality and things of that nature, is G under just the water and sewer category, which specifically talks about it being permitted in those areas which the anticipated growth and development may occur that require this. So can you explain to me how this project meets that requirement when this is not about development and growth, because the growth and development, as acknowledged, is actually serviced by other water providers, not the city of Fort Collins?
So this project is for the benefit of the Fort Collins water utility only, not any other water providers. And so the GMA, as out to the north and to the northwest, outside of the service area of the Fort Collins utility, it's not. This project will not supply water for that. It is primarily for resiliency and for storage, but it's also to help get to build out and infill within the Fort Collins water utility infrastructure footprint itself. So I know there was kind of some conflicting wording in your packet, but we will, it's not for massive growth. It's just to kind of top out the build out within the city, within the utility itself. Our current storage we have is very small. And we have a water vulnerability supply study, and it showed that without Halligan online, we would have fairly frequent water restrictions to our customers as soon as 2035 without this online. This project and the purpose and need when this is identified is to prevent those frequent water restrictions up to 2065 within the footprint of the Fort Collins water utility proper. What that preventing restrictions, the definition of that is that if we're in a 1 in 50 year drought, our customers don't know the difference. We're able to meet our demands and obligations, and we're able to carry over about 20% of our annual demand and storage every year, which we cannot do now. So I know I'm going off into other angles, but this project is really for, and usually we have a slide that shows that, for the actual Fort Collins water utility, not out into the GMA.
That's what I gathered. So what you're saying, when you're talking about restrictions, are you talking about outdoor irrigation restrictions?
Watering restrictions and things like that for use.
But not for actual, life-sustaining restrictions?
No, we wouldn't want to have life-sustaining restrictions. Obviously, those drought restrictions are tiered, but that would be the absolute worst case. But yeah, it's primarily watering restrictions.
So with this project, would the city of Fort Collins still then encourage conservation?
Absolutely.
Even if the customers wouldn't feel a drought situation because now you have this overabundance of access to water?
Yeah, I don't know if we feel like we're going to have an overabundance, but I think we'll have an adequate supply. We have a very robust conservation program, and it has to work in concert, right? It is a finite resource that we have, and looking at the out years and these climate models, they are a little concerning, and we're preparing for that. So it all has to work together. Conservation has really been successful here in reducing those numbers, the amount of water that households have used, but it needs to continue, and we need to drop those numbers in addition. The modeling, and that was the no action alternative identified in our EIS, was non-structural changes to what we do. Can we conserve? Can we do other things and not have to build a municipal water supply project? And we just couldn't make those numbers work. We can't do conservation only and avoid these restrictions, but it's a vital part of our overall management plan in the utility. Has to be conservation and increased storage working together.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Commissioner King, did you have a comment?
Yes, sorry to go again, but I have follow-up questions based on your forecasting. Is there? I think that during the first part of the presentation, you were saying we have 140,000 residents and are planning for 175,000 at some point, and it sounds like a lot of water, from 6,000 to 14,000 acre feet. I'm wondering how long do dams last? How far out are you forecasting the water needs? And is there any chance that this project isn't going to be big enough, and before the dam has ran its life, you're going to come and need a whole new dam that takes up more space?
When you build a project like this, you're limited by the Army Corps of Engineers and the federal government. They don't want to speculatory projects, so they look at your purpose and need and they identify what you actually need and what you can actually use, and that's kind of determines your size. Plus the water rights that we had to store in this, that we're looking for a place to store, were kind of the two determining factors. The modeling of this is out to 2065. The life of the dam is going to be much longer. This facility will be in place for well over 100 years, 150 years. It'll be very large roller compacted concrete constructed structure that is going to be viable for an awful long time. It depends on how far out you go always as to what your water supply looks like. But as of right now, we have a very robust water rights portfolio in Fort Collins, and we have a lot of different buckets to draw from, and we're looking very good well out into the future. I would not call this a forever project, but it's for an awful long time. Now, it also depends on, how the planning and the political direction of the city, and how dense you want to go on infilling and things of that nature. Those are decisions that will be made in the future. But right now, our modeling shows that this will last, provide water for generations to come for Fort Collins. Is there? Okay.
Great. Yeah, Commissioner Duffy.
So one of the decision criteria is duplicative services within the county. Why can't the city of Fort Collins source water that's going to be put into the incoming Glade Reservoir and forego this project?
So back when NISP was proposed, we were looking at this. You got to remember, we were back in the 1990s, 1980s, 2003. So we were kind of ahead of NISP with this project. And I think everybody wants to control their own destiny, right? We had our own water rights that were not the water rights that the NISP project, the Glade project, was going to use. They were converted agricultural rights from decades ago that we have not been able to properly utilize within utility. And so this gave us the opportunity to have control over our water rights and put them in a place that we could control. Honestly, at the time, we felt our project is very small compared to NISP. The scope and scale of it's tiny, really, in comparison. We thought it would be quicker on the permitting side. It's maybe not necessarily proven that way, but it definitely is still cheaper. Even with the long time frame of permitting, our firm yield acre foot number is significantly under what we could go into NISP for, and so it's still the cheapest available option to the utility, and that's why we continue to pursue it. There's also the environmental reason, right? NISP is a new draw off the Poudre River system. This is not. These are existing water rights that are being diverted elsewhere currently that will now be stored up there. So we're not diminishing the flows of the river in that sense. And also, NISP is very complicated, the conveyance. There's a lot of pumps and a lot of electrical use and things like that. We don't have that. We're gravity fed into our system and our pipelines. So environmental considerations were taken into consideration back then too. So I think it's that combination of all of those as to why Halligan was chosen to go down that path and why we've stayed the course all these years later.
So it's cheaper for the city of Fort Collins to build the dam, deconstruct it, instead of just buying credits in Glade Reservoir?
That is correct, yes.
And maybe kind of a follow-on on that, I think, is, so one of our focuses is on alternatives, and we're now talking about kind of Glade versus the Halligan option, but the materials mentioned some other alternatives that you guys consider. Could you just maybe, this one seems like a good candidate for all the reasons that you've described, but could you just outline some of the other considerations of why the other alternatives are not satisfactory or don't provide water?
So I can remember them all out of the EIS. We talked about the no action alternative, about no structural changes, and we've talked about NISP. We also had gravel pit storage north of town. That was, I forget, it was 4,000-ish acre feet of storage in existing. I believe there was 15 existing gravel pits that we would be able to store water into. The issue there was really conveyance complexities, as I understand it. Our Halligan project is on channel. It's a direct connection right down to our municipal intake. The gravel pit alternative, really, I think it was the storage and the complexities of getting the water there and getting it out. We also had agricultural reservoir alternative, which would have used two existing reservoirs owned by the North Poudre Irrigation Company. I believe it was their number 5 and number 6 reservoirs. And through agreement with them, we could store additional water in there. And again, that was conveyance issues, complexities, and costs, but it was also water quality issues. Water quality in those reservoirs would have been much less than what we've got now. The further up a drainage you go, up closer to the headwaters, typically the water quality is improved. And the North Fork is no different. Just naturally, as that water comes out of that, higher elevation, Precambrian granitic rock, and it comes down and it interacts naturally with some of these sedimentary formations, and cattle and wildlife and everything starts to interact with that water. The quality degrades as you come down. Temperatures get hotter, and that's the same for pretty much any stream. So water quality is very, very pristine up where that location, and so that's where you see a lot of developments up. One, so you can gravity flow back, and two, because your water quality typically tends to improve as the higher up the watershed you get. So
Great. Yeah, thank you for that explanation. Did you have other questions, Commissioner Duff? Sure, go ahead. Commissioner Chalet.
Quick follow-up on this water conversation here. You were saying that this will allow you to access water that you haven't been able to access before. I'm assuming this is agricultural water that you've bought the rights to but haven't been able to use?
yes, if you want or in depth what those water rights are, I can punt to our water rights attorney, but I believe they're mostly what's called the Southside ditches. They're converted agricultural rights that were acquired through development in Fort Collins years ago. These rights have not been able to be properly utilized by the utility for all these years because the term we like to use is there was no bucket, there was no place to store them. And so that's been thought for a long time that we had to have a place to put these rights and to utilize them, and that is what this Halligan project is.
Is this going to result in any dried up farmland now?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
We are not acquiring any additional rights, drying up any land for this project. These rights were acquired, decades ago in the 80s and 90s. So there's no dry up associated with this today.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. And then I also wanted to ask about the wetland bank credits. So just for my understanding, are those local at all, or are they in the state, or can you tell us more on how those wetland bank credits work?
Yeah, so this bank is brand new. It's working its way through. Recently got approval from the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's getting built out right now. It's physically located, I wish I knew, a few miles below the mouth of where Phantom Canyon comes out on the channel of the North Fork of the Poudre River. So the proximity to our project is very close, which is very good. We have some permanent impacts with our project, and then we're also going to have a higher storage pool. So some historical wetlands are going to be essentially impacted and drowned out. But we also are going to establish new wetlands along the high water line, the new water line. And so kind of the net difference is 11 and a half acres of total impacted wetlands. Our wetlands plan, since our mitigation bank is right there, right next, close to our project, we are hoping for a 1.5 to 1 ratio on that mitigation. So for every acre that we need to mitigate, we will have a new 1.5 acres of establishment of credits for that. So the bank is being built out over the next several years. The credits are going to be released in packages. We have put an escrow payment in now. Like the end of this calendar year, we have a delivery schedule that we should start receiving those credits. This is really, the Fort Collins obligation on this is really to make the payment. That's kind of the good thing to make, for these banks. It's expensive payments, but all the monitoring, all the compliance, establishment of that bank is all upon the people that permitted it and are operating it and are monitoring it. And so that we're really hands off on that. So we're covered on our project. If something happens to that bank, the federal permitting agencies are going to be working with the folks that are building that bank to solve those problems, not directly with Fort Collins. We will have some the wetlands that reestablish along our new high water line we're going to let them naturally come in. There's going to be no kind of augmenting those or speeding those up. We're going to, over time, monitor those, make sure they come in as we anticipate. That might be up to about a 20-year process. We might need to pivot if those don't come in as they've been mapped out and planned, and we may need to do some additional mitigation then. But really, we're not doing any other hands-on mitigation for wetlands for this project.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that explanation. My other question, I think it's, part of it's implied in the conversation we've already had, but is there, so the power generation kind of ability from this project sounds like it's fairly limited, and, you'll utilize it on site, but there's no opportunity for kind of a, power generation that could be then used elsewhere.
Yeah. That we just don't have enough water to take power off-site to generate that much power. We would also have real issues with trying to build that transmission line out of this location across these conservation properties and get it out to where it would need to go if we did have the ability to generate that power. And then the closest substation that's owned by Poudre Valley REA, we're told, is absolutely at max capacity. So even if we had the ability to generate power, they would have no way to take that in. So it gets to be a very large infrastructure project. So it's just for on-site. This is a fairly new development to the project. This on-site generation of power, we were avoiding that for a long time to avoid FERC regulations. We've been talking with them. We feel like we will qualify with the micro hydro. They recognize that they need to have some carve outs in there, some exemptions in their permitting process to allow these small on-site units that aren't transporting power anywhere else. So that's been a real worthwhile pivot, and I think it's going to be an overall benefit, right, for our project, our emissions, how we operate it, and to get rid of that overhead power line, which will vacate that overhead easement and just remove it, which is, the Landowners Association is very happy with that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, any other questions before we open it up to public comment? And yeah, with that, we'll move to public comment. So I'd like to open the public hearing and take public comment. Is there anyone in the room that would like to give testimony?
Mr. Chair, we did have a sign-up sheet, so if you don't mind, we'll call folks up based on when they signed up.
Great, yeah, please.
First up in person, we have Zach Thode.
How many public comments do you have? Are you going to limit me to 3 minutes? Is that the number? Okay. Zach Thode, I'm a rancher in Livermore, so I manage the Roberts Ranch, which they refer to as part of their mitigation plan with the 2004 easement. But I run my own personal ranching operation that runs cattle around Halligan Reservoir all the way around. Look, in principle, I think any storage project in Larimer County is a good project, and I support any storage project, including the Halligan storage project. My comments today are fully in support of the project. We do have some concerns. Me and a couple other neighbors have had some conversations, and there's just some slight concerns about how we engage with each other in the future. A couple things. I hope that we learn from each other in the future that we can use water together between agriculture and the city better over time. We talked about different buckets in this reservoir, and I think we can do a better job of getting collaboration into the future so that we don't end up with another municipal reservoir that they fill up and they leave full and never use the water until maybe their 2050 drought. And I think we can have a better dialogue. And I look forward to working with the City of Fort Collins to have that dialogue. One of the other concerns is we are still not, as landowners upstream from Halligan Reservoir, sure what the recreation is going to be upstream of Halligan Reservoir. And historically, there's been very bad trespassing problems from fishermen and hunters upstream of Halligan Reservoir. And to the point where on the Roberts Ranch, we gave up. We had too many trespassers and we were losing too much recreation value. We ended up leasing the private property to the CPW guys. But the neighbor landowner is very concerned about trespassing onto their property. And it's very remote and very, very high value fishing area. And so we aren't sure what the story is with that. There's been a lot of conversations, but no clear passage. There's been also perceived threats about eminent domain and condemnation in regards to access for recreation. But again, very little conversation. And we'd love to have better conversations around that because I think that it could pose some problems. I think I'm past my statute of limitations, but I grew up in Cherokee Park, and I fished in Cherokee Park without a fishing license my whole childhood because there was no enforcement from CPW. And my concern is that story keeps going, and there is not very good enforcement from CPW, and the City of Fort Collins hasn't given us very good feedback about what do they plan on doing when we see increased recreation above Halligan Reservoir. The other concern that I have is there's a couple other diversion structures downstream of Halligan Reservoir that are in need of being rebuilt. We've waited with the City of Fort Collins to see if they'd help us so we could have maybe a fish passage project involved that kind of fell apart. So those projects are going to probably move forward with just essential function, and because it's too expensive to build structures with heavy duty fish passage. So So those are some things I think we can do better at, but I do support the project, and I look forward to working with the City of Fort Collins and making that happen.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
I believe that's the last person we have signed up. So if you'd like to either go to the rest of the room and then we can look online.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, let's open up to the room if there's any others. I see a hand in the audience there. If you want to step forward.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jordana Barrick, and I'm actually a landowner up in the Phantom Canyon Ranches. And so I have a home site and a property, a conservation property that is located on the West Access Road. And so I just had a couple of things related to conditions that I wanted to make sure came across and were withheld with the county. So regards to roads, I had a concern around Highway 287. The turn lane, if you're turning onto Road 80C, is a very short turn lane at the bottom of two hills that come down. And if for some reason the applicant got through the construction and the development process. Currently, they say that they're going to be using the east access road for most of the construction traffic. But if that changes and they start using the west access road, I would really request that the county enforce that they work with CDOT on just making sure that that turn lane off of 287 gets managed appropriately. County Road 80C, especially going up over Callaway Hill, that is, I have to go up that hill to get to my home. And in the summertime, there's a lot of campers and trailers that go up along with construction traffic. That road gets worn down quite a bit. And so I would really request that the county make sure that they're withholding reevaluating if that road needs to get graded a little more frequently than twice a year. On the ranch roads, I saw a comment, I think maybe in the engineering report, or maybe it was in some of the conditions related to putting up speed limit signs on the ranch roads. And I think this was condition 19D. Again, this is a community that has really prioritized its open space, and actually, as far as the land ethic goes for the landowners within Phantom Canyon Ranches, a lot of them have surrendered fences and property lines in order to preserve open space for wildlife and the natural character of the place. And so I would request that perhaps the applicant go back and work with the Landowners Association on perhaps not putting up speed limit signs, but incorporating that into the best management practices that they develop for the construction site to say that speed limits are 15 miles an hour or less on ranch roads. The comment to, the time goes faster than I realized. The comment around preserving the character of the area with the roads, that the city was countering to what the condition said, I think as a personal landowner, I would agree with that. And then condition 23, if there's additional outreach plans related to the technical review, I noticed that the contact list for ownership is out of date. And so I'd request that you have the applicant update that, because I did not actually receive a notice of the hearing and any of the communications. And so I'll stop with that.
Okay. Thank you. And we should note, so that was Ms. Barrick, and Ms. Barrick is actually a member of our commission. She is not here tonight because obviously she has a conflict, and hence her testimony this evening. So thank you. Anyone else in the audience here who wishes to provide comment? And otherwise online, and if online, if you want to use the raise hand function to indicate that you'd like to make a comment.
If there are any members of the public who would like to comment on this case, please use the raise hand function now. There are no hands raised.
Okay. Well, thank you. And then now I think we'd invite the applicant back up to address any of the public comments that we heard this evening. So those two comments. And I took some notes so I can kind of prompt some questions, or if you guys want to just address those yourselves.
Hello, Commission. My name is Eric Patyandi. I'm the city's in-house water attorney with the city attorney's office. I was going to take the lead on responding to, I think there were 4 points from Mr. Thode, and then I think Mr. Parkins will respond to the other comments about the roads and stuff. Mr. Thode asked about using water better together between the city and agriculture. I just wanted to point out that the city has a long-standing program to rent its excess water to local agriculture. In wet, because water rights yield different amounts in different years, in wet and average years, the city often has water it's not able to use. So we have a pretty robust rental program where our city council sets rental rates, and then we rent back quite a bit of water into the agricultural ditches it's from. So, for example, North Pooter water comes with a CBT component and a native water right component. The city has historically always rented basically all of that native water right ag component back into the North Pooter system. That will continue on. And I think, the city is certainly open to continuing to have conversations where we can use our water that our customers don't need to support local agriculture. Mr. Thode had a question about not wanting to leave the reservoir full until it's fully needed in the 2050, 2060 timeframe. I'd point out that the city, as part of its mitigation package and its fish and wildlife mitigation plan, has what we've called the temporary environmental pool. That is where on an annual basis we'll designate a portion of the water that we don't plan to use for municipal uses, but we do plan to work with CPW to release that into the river to maintain and improve flows. Basically, the idea is we would mimic future operations of the reservoir in the short term, where in the future we'll release that down to our pipeline. In the short term, until we get to build out, we would release that water down the stream for improving fish flows, and then that water could probably be, some of that water may be able to be reused for agricultural other purposes. So that there was that. Mr. Thode asked about recreation upstream of Halligan Reservoir. As Mr. Parkin discussed, recreation on the surface of the reservoir is not part of the Halligan project. It's something that we may be willing to explore later with CPW and others, sort of as a separate standalone project in the future. Currently, the city doesn't own that land above the on the upstream end of the reservoir. That's land that's managed by CPW. So, that's really not something the city has control over. I think we're certainly willing to work with CPW about how, try to encourage them to enforce their trespass laws and other things like that. But at least currently, the city is not doing anything to invite greater public access to the reservoir at this point. And as far as, working with Mr. Thode on those structures downstream, I haven't heard about that personally, but I'm sure that's something we can have those discussions with him in the future about potentially improving those structures and working to improve make sure the water we're releasing down to the North Fork does have the maximum improvement it can. And I didn't know if there were any follow-up questions on those points.
Yeah, not from me, and I'll look to my colleagues, and I think not. Yeah, so thank you for that response. Okay. And also just make it clear that the public comment, I think I've closed the hearing on the public comment side, so. Sorry, I didn't print my script today. I'm a little... Thank you. Yeah, and like I said, I did take some notes, so I can prompt some questions, but it sounds like you guys did as well. So if you wouldn't mind just responding to the citizens' questions concerning a lot of it concerning access and coordination. So.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. If I forgot something, let me know. So, addressing the 287 turn lane to Cherokee Park Road, County Road 80C, the primary access is going to be what we call the east access, which does come off of 280C, off Highway 287, a little bit further to the north, a few miles to the north. We have a plan in place being put in place with CDOT, where we during construction seasons there is a climbing lane there. That's where, as those are everybody's familiar with 287, you kind of have that shared passing lane in the middle in some of those spots, which is always kind of controversial. But we are going to restripe that, and that is going to be the turn lane into our project off of the east. And we're also going to reduce the speed limit in their CDOT will by 20 miles per hour at the bottom of that hill. So there'll be a significant speed limit reduction and the elimination of that climbing lane for single file traffic past our construction to avoid conflict with the traffic up there. We could certainly, if it turns out that we need the west access, do something similar down where the ADC turnoff is, but we do not anticipate using ADC very much at all. In fact, with our access easements, our negotiations with the Phantom Canyon Association, they really wouldn't even allow for us to use that for anything more as secondary or emergency access. So we would need to actually start there with the board to do a lot of work with them if we were to shift gears and use that as a main access point. We're going to primarily use the west access for two activities. One is going to be the establishment of the test quarry, which is to inform design. This is a roller compacted concrete dam. Not to get too technical on that, but the aggregate defines the chemistry and the mix of that concrete. We want to use on-site aggregate, so we will excavate 2,000 cubic yards. We'll take that into a laboratory. We'll do an analysis along with actual water from the reservoir that will be used during construction to come up with that best concrete mix. So that's going to be a 2 or 3 month process. And then we will also build that road that we looked at earlier on the west side of the North Fork. That half of the road we would want to construct from the top down off that west access down to the river crossing. So those two, and that would be another 2-3 months process. So we're going to try to, if we can do it with our permitting, do those concurrently. So we bundle up our impacts to the west access and those residents into one period of activity, and then they won't see us very much after that. Maximum vehicle traffic that we anticipate at the height of that activity on the west axis would be less than 20 vehicles per day. On the flip side, on the east axis, we anticipate 70 vehicles per day when we're in full construction. That's with an on-site aggregate quarry in place. If we have to do off-site aggregate, which we're really hoping we don't, then that number could go up to as high as 200, which is allowed within our EIS. But the east axis is where we really focused our attention. It's where we put the proper agreements and easements in place for our construction access, not the west. The east access does not have any cabin sites, homeowners, those types of impacts that the west access does, and so we're very aware of our activity being temporary disruption on the west side. Callaway Hill on ADC, as part of the conditions that came from staff, certainly at the county's discretion, if they feel like we are impacting that county road, there are mechanisms in place there for us as the utility to step in and help monetarily the county to maintain that. So we are committed to maintaining the integrity of Cherokee Park Road. We don't feel that we're going to impact it, but if we did, we would certainly stand behind that activity and help the county keep that to a high standard for the residents. We recognize that is a heavily traveled road, especially in the summer. We've all been up Callaway Hill in the switchboards and oncoming traffic, and we want to keep that road safe as much as anybody else does. The speed limit signs go to kind of where we're at with the landowners to kind of keep the native condition of these access roads in place as much as possible. Our speed limits are well defined in our access easements with the landowners and with the association. That's defined on that west access as 15 miles per hour. Our contractors know that. We're aware of that. We have to have signed vehicles. There's notification processes in place. So all of that is defined in our access easement with those landowners. And so, if allowed, we would certainly don't feel like we would need to sign that, and we can certainly control that. In the activities that we've had to date, we've had very good success with the geotechnical reviews or investigations. We've had very good success with our contractors keeping those speed limits down and low, and so we will continue to do that. And then the final one, I believe, is the ownership contact list, which is, we're in error there, and we will update that. And so apologies. We did, I believe we have 147 names on our contact list. We directly contacted all those. We did have a Livermore town hall on February 12th. reaching out to as part of our public outreach for this 1041 permit to citizens in the Livermore Valley. So we certainly want to reach out to everybody. We don't want this to catch anybody by surprise. As Mr. Thode indicated, communication is key. We have a good line of communication with a lot of people, but not everybody, obviously. So hopefully everybody knows by now. You come to us, we'll be responsive, and we want to make sure that there's no surprises, and everybody knows we're up front what's happening and when it's happening.
Great. Have you guys had some direct contact with that landowner association that was mentioned?
Absolutely. We have continual contact with the board. Our next meeting with them is the 27th of this month. So those are near continual emails and conversations with the association.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Duffy?
So you're going to do the test aggregate within the next couple of months, or the duration of that will be 3 months?
Yeah, that would be the max duration. So we would do the light improvements to the West Access Road to get the batch plant in there, the equipment that we need to open up that quarry. That would take place shortly after technical review is complete. 1041 permit is, we receive that first. Technical review is complete, and then we would want to move on that, fairly quickly. So that would be the next on the ground activities for this project would stage after that. 1041 approval, technical review is complete, and then we would, improve the west access lightly, do the test quarry, and then build the west bridge road, we call it.
Okay, so that'd be after you come to staff with technical review. My concern there is, there's a big difference between 70 vehicles and 200 vehicles a day. So yes. If you guys have to go to that 200 limit, do you need to come back to the county commissioners and ask for approval, or is that part of the process that you're already asking for approval for a limit up to 200 cars, or 200 vehicles, excuse me?
Right now, I don't think we're asking for that. That's what we were allowed, or has been identified within our EIS process. If we were certainly to need that, we would absolutely have a conversation with the county staff. We are, as a backup plan, identifying a couple of off-site aggregate sources, but we really don't want to do that. And I can tell you that our federal permitting partners don't want that either. The impacts, the emissions, and on-site aggregate quarry makes a lot more sense. Until we get that laboratory analysis, we can't be 100% sure, but preliminary results are promising. Our preliminary investigation is promising. We would really need to have something come out of left field, like a fault that we didn't see, or some bad rock that we didn't anticipate, or groundwater levels that are higher than we thought. That we drilled that pretty deep and didn't encounter any groundwater. So something out of left field would hit us. But short of that happening, we're very committed to the on-site aggregate source.
Great. Yeah. Commissioner Chalet?
Couple quick questions that may or may not be for you, might be for staff, but lighting on site during construction. So I noticed that typical hours of operation are 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. I think that's what it said, but there's a possibility of it needing to be 24 hours a day. Are there lighting restrictions while they're under construction, and what are those, if anybody knows the answer to that?
They would have to comply with the Larimer County lighting regulations, which were recently adopted and went into effect on February 13th.
Okay, the ones that we did?
Correct.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, and then is it possible for us, do we need to change the condition of approval that's in the packet to change it from posted speed limit signs to a best practices management plan?
You would have to propose a change to the condition, and I'll just point out that condition was put in as part of the health conditions with an emphasis, I think, on reducing noise and dust, but I'll let Leah speak to that.
Yeah, Jenny said it correctly. We were more worried about the west access road because there's more housing in that area. If you can it's still sparse, but it was to reduce dust as a nuisance because we've had some of these longer projects in these rural areas and people will complain about the repeated dust in their yards, or not really yards, but more just the dust in the air because it'll linger on stagnant days and things like that, as well as the noise, because most of our noise will be fine for the construction site because it's far from residents, but along the routes, just that
extra travel and traffic, they'll notice it in their nice, quiet, rural environment. They'll notice that change. So it's up to you guys if you want to remove it. It sounds like Fort Collins has a good BMP in place. One of the things to also consider is the state health department, when they issue their air permit, sometimes they require signs to be posted, and there's really not a minimum or maximum number. They just say post them. So one of the things we were just recommending is, as like right off the access road, you could just have a reminder that this is a slow 15-mile-per-hour road to reduce nuisances, or maybe as they're exiting the construction site. But we weren't asking for one like every mile or every 500 feet or something.
So maybe like one as you're turning on to the access road.
Just as a trigger and a reminder.
Okay.
But that's up to you guys. It's not pertinent for us if Fort Collins is confident that their BMPs will be followed.
And the number of signs posted isn't specified in the condition.
Yeah.
Okay. And then one last question kind of around dirt and particulate. If I recall correctly, there's a restriction once the wind is at 30 miles per hour. Where is that wind going to be measured? Because if it's measured in the city of Fort Collins, that's not going to be the same, right? So is there going to be, who determines that, and where is it determined at?
So that's kind of a state level permit limit, just to make sure, like on excessively windy days. And it could, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever asked. I'll have to check. But I believe it's just like if your weather app, if it says that your area that you're experiencing on your phone is over 30, then you would cease land clearing activities. You can still do a number of other things, just things that don't generate dust.
Okay. I mean, as someone who lives in Wellington, I can assure you that most of the time the weather app, the InAccuWeather, is not quite correct for the wind gusts that you get the closer you get to the Wyoming state line. So to the extent of the wind gusts, and of course if there's the quarries going on and all the aggregate, I mean, there's a lot going on there, right? I just kind of wondered how are we regulating that, or is the state regulating that, or is it like on your honor kind of thing, or?
It's more on the honor. And actually, the applicant may be able to respond to that. In some of their studies they referenced, they had to do some modeling and things like that. And I'm not sure if you guys have any meteorology monitoring on site, or what you guys were using for your modeling.
Not from an air quality standpoint. Yeah, so the answer to that is we have not done any of that from an air quality standpoint. Yeah.
Okay. It was in some of their technical documents, CDS Smith, and some of those studies that they had to kind of model and predict what emissions, like cumulative versus like individual activities. So some of those had to reference some meteorology in the area.
Okay. Just like kind of, if you haven't picked up on this, I worry about the air quality quite a bit, right? And so so on those high air quality alert days, then there's no activity. Is that correct? Is that what I was reading?
Not no activity. It would be more just limited on that land clear. Anything that creates a particulate matter or debris that could be carried in the air. So there's probably a number of other activities that they could do that, like, laying concrete. That's a wet, there's a high moisture content. So they could still do activity like that as long as it's not excessively producing dust.
Is that like with a wheelbarrow or an engined vehicle?
Engine vehicles, like an engine could still operate during a high wind day, but you can still drive on high wind days. But yeah, they'd still be able to do some activities. They just can't, say, excavate.
Okay. So, all right. Well, I would just emphasize to the applicant and those that are working with you that there are multiple projects going on up there. So if it's a really crappy don't go outside and breathe day, to be cognizant of that, please. So that's all I have.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners for staff or the applicant? And otherwise we'll move into deliberations. And seeing none, yeah, we'll move ourselves into discussion and deliberation. Um, yeah, if anyone wants to lead that off, I'm certainly very supportive of this 1041 permit. It seems like the applicant is obviously, it's been a project that's been in the pipeline for quite some time, and you can tell because there's just a lot of kind of thoughtful approach to everything, and I really appreciate the regard for the environmental impacts, and just see it as a great improvement and an excellent example of that maybe collaborative kind of project where agricultural and municipal uses are kind of in a shared reservoir. So
Overall, I'm very supportive of this project. Of course, I'm concerned about a few things, but I think given when the project started to where we are now and the potential for some upward growth rather than outward growth within the city limits, I can see how you would meet the one requirement that I was concerned that maybe you did not meet. And so I will support the project. I would just encourage you to communicate as much as possible with the landowners association, get that updated list, the people that are surrounding them, including the gentleman that was here to speak today, and be good stewards of the water because, as you said, it's a finite resource. And as an area around here, we need to be as mindful of the water that we use as we possibly can be. So, thank you.
and Commissioner Eggleston.
Just a quick, I've been aware and support of this project for many years, and it's a good project that's severely needed for now into the future. So kudos on the good report and making it this far.
Commissioner Duffy.
Shall I make a motion?
Do it.
Yes. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the Board of County Commissioners approve the application for a 1041 permit for the Halligan Water Supply Project 1041 permit, file 24 Zone 3697, subject to the conditions recommended by staff.
Second.
And I think so we have a motion, just the second part of that motion was with an update to the proposed condition 4. Is that part of your motion? I'm not sure if I heard you say that, I guess.
Excuse me, I was reading from the packet.
Yeah, and that was a late addition based on the earlier discussion regarding condition number 4. The Planning Commission can choose to make that change or not.
Let me read that in one more time then. I move that the Planning Commission recommends that the Board of County Commissioners approve the application for the 1041 permit for Halligan Water Supply Project, file number 24, Zone 3697, subject to the conditions of approval recommended by staff, with an updated to proposed condition 4 to match the land use code language in 1012-1.
So we have a motion, and do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Cassidy,
Yes.
Cholet,
Yes.
Eggleston,
Yes.
Duffy,
Yes.
Weiss,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Rowe.
Yes. Well, thank you again for the presentation, and yeah, we really appreciate the participation from the couple audience members, so thank you. And that was our single discussion item. Are there any reports from staff?
Staff does have a couple updates. We touched on one earlier. We will be doing compliance training coming up, so get ready for that. Also, as part of that compliance training, we need to update our Planning Commission bylaws. We need to align those with recently adopted policies of a code of conduct that the Board of County Commissioners has implemented for all boards and commissions. So you'll be seeing some draft bylaws that we've made updates just to align with those policy decisions. So those will be coming your way. And then I have a giant favor to ask the group. We send out a request for you to RSVP your attendance to this meeting in advance. That's so we can determine and verify that we have quorum in order to hold the meeting. We would really appreciate it if you could respond by the deadline requested in that email so that we can guarantee that these meetings go as accordingly. So just a reminder there, please respond to us and let us know that you're attending. We do appreciate that all of you do regularly attend and want to note that.
It's a good reminder. I'm just kidding. I'm the worst as well. So.
I'm not naming names, but you know who you are.
Okay. Well, we appreciate that. And with that, the meeting's adjourned. So thank you.